What's up, everybody? No, this is not the regular Badlands podcast. This is not that. This is draft season. Welcome to another edition of draft season. I am your co-host, D.A. Osorio, joined, one as always, by Strong Island's finest, Michael Meegan. And on this specific evening, with the most handsome man in showbiz, the most handsome man in the draft biz, Connor, the Hitman Rogers, who is here to talk all things Badlands draft guide with us. Connor, I'll start with you. How you doing? How you feeling, brother?
I'm great, fellas. You know how much I love you guys. Excited to be here, getting to the finish line with the draft guide. We were all just together at the Badlands event, which hopefully everybody is caught up on rest and recovered by now. You could tell I am. I don't rarely or don't often wear my glasses, but I've been staring at a big board monitor for it feels like 800 hours straight. So we are at that point right now, but I'm feeling good. I'm ready to roll.
Awesome. It took me a day or two to recover. We drove back to Maryland the very next day, and I felt it in my back. Like I felt it in my knees coming off up and
The
down the stage.
joints.
Yes, the joints were
Yeah.
screaming.
Me too, honestly. Yeah, like my knee joints. Like when I went
Yeah.
up the stairs the next day, I was like, "What is this from?" Brutal,
it's
brutal.
it's the and obviously Meegs is younger than we are, so
Yeah,
Meegs can't
no.
attest to any of that. But Meegs, you were in good shape when I gave you the last dap of the night Friday evening. So how are you feeling as we barrel towards the NFL draft, man?
Dude, I'm feeling great. When I'm glad to see you're recovered. When I saw you, you were on the way out, so I was, sent you on your way. I was glad to see you were having a good time.
Yeah.
I said, just super excited to talk about the guy. It's probably the thing I enjoy the most that I get to do at Badlands. Given the team that we have now, it's gotten so much bigger that me and Connor were talking right before that we're just hovering right around 200 reports. By
Yeah,
the time it goes live, we're definitely going to be over 200 reports, which as much as we believe it, they're still going to take someone who isn't in the guide, and we're going to be rushing on Saturday at 1:30, being like, "Who the fuck did they just take in the fifth
yep.
round?" And so, as a time old tradition, I'm just waiting for that, which is now 8 days away, basically.
That's right. And so let's jump right in, guys, because you're right. This draft guide is a labor of love, so to speak. And so, Connor, I'll start with you with the first question. Who is the guy who you didn't expect to love until you did this process, that prospect that you were like, wow, I did not realize how much I was going to end up liking this prospect? Who's a guy for you in this class that you feel very strongly about?
That's a fun question. Let me look through some of the reports that I did and guys I ended up a little higher on. I'll give you one. Andrew Armstrong from Arkansas,
Yeah.
who's been a character in our group chat for the guide. When I got to him and his teammate, Isaac Tesla. Now,
Yeah.
Tesla, to be fair, was a Senior Bowl guy, so they're a little bit more well known no matter what. When you're on the Senior Bowl list, it kind of pushes you up the scouting list. You should watch all the Senior Bowl guys and expect that 97% of them will probably be draft picks. Armstrong is somebody to me that I turned on the tape with a fresh perspective, and I love the intensity he plays with, the catch radius, catches the ball away from his body, very physical. I think there's more on the bone there as a red zone target in an NFL offense. He's a real perimeter wide receiver because Tesla played the slot for
Yep.
them. That was a report when I wrote it up. You're looking at these wide receiver rankings you've had for months, and you got about 30 guys at the time I wrote him up, and I'm like, wow, I'm going to slot this guy into as my 15th best wide receiver. That's a big ranking to put on a guy that late in the process, and that's where he ended up sitting. The same could be said for Elijah Badger, the Florida wide receiver.
Yeah.
I was really, really impressed with the tape. When a guy has that kind of yards per reception, everybody's like, oh, it's a deep threat.
Mhm.
And you turn on the tape, and it's like, well, that's how he was used. But I said he's not Stephon Diggs. Let's not get crazy.
Right.
But his best plays when he perfects a route or he generates separation in the intermediate and he has this body control along the sideline and he toe taps. That's what you see there where you're like, man, the flashes of this guy are high end.
Yeah.
Where if he plays a little bit more consistent, do I have a number 3 wide receiver that nobody's talking about right now? So
Yeah.
2 wide receivers I really, really liked. And that's really the most fun part of the guide is that's one of the groups we go deeper on. I'm looking at it right now. It looks like we're going to have about 30 plus wide receivers in this guide,
Wow.
which is pretty jarring. Hopefully the Jets take 1 or 2
Right.
of them. Knowing our luck, they won't. But yeah, that's one of the more fun elements of doing this thing.
Well, it's interesting because one of my best friends is a Florida Gators fan, and so whenever my friends who are fans of other teams like that are not the Hurricanes or teams that like we talk about a lot of, I'm always like, is this your bias talking to me about some of these guys, or are you for real here? Yeah,
yeah. Whenever you check your mentions after you do like a mock draft or you do a ranking, and there's just like somebody in there furious with you about a player, and you haven't heard of the player or you just didn't get to the player yet. And then you click the profile and it's like, it's an alum of the school as a player. I'm not saying they're wrong.
Right.
There's been people that have been like, I've been telling you about this guy for months. And then you watch him and you're like, great job. You were right. There's also times where you watch him and you're like, this guy kind of stinks. Like, these people are just college football fans. They're crazy. But sometimes that's the fun in all of it.
Absolutely. So PSU Joe in the Discord, understand if Tyler Warren hits, we're not giving you credit for that. We've all known about Tyler Warren for a long time.
Yeah, you got to vouch for like a Jalen Reed, safety for day 3 or
there you
like
go.
That.
Exactly. So Meegs, I'll go to you. So a year ago, Josiah Stewart was a guy that you said, there might be something there at edge. There might be something there. I know you love scouting the pass rushers, dude. Who's a guy in the guide that you're like, listen, I'm staking my flag on this guy. The more I dove into him, I really loved him. And I think that if the Jets add him to this pass rushing group, it could be really good for us.
I mean, edge rushers are tough. Like I said, Josiah was the guy that I got to write up for that.
Yep.
In that regard, there were a couple defensive tackles that I found myself falling for, or where I could see myself. Like I think in my mock that's going to get released probably one of these days for Badlands. I had Yaya Black from Iowa, defensive tackle, who's just all measurables, 6'6", 35-inch arms, just a mountain of a man who. I don't know if the pass rush game is ever going to come together where it looks just like if I can overwhelm you with length, I can win. And if you can handle the length, I kind of lose. As a pass rusher, but as a run stuffer, when you turn to Ohio State, I thought he gave Josh Jones and Donovan Jackson like a good run for their money, who are two of my favorite players just tape-wise in this class. So he's the one who comes to mind for that. And I'll say on the offensive side of the ball, the guy that I know I've talked to Connor about this player who I don't know if he's a fit for the Jets because I think he's a zone center. Jake Majors is just a guy I'm like, I just want to bet on that guy. 58 career starts. Sark trusts him completely to do everything at the line of scrimmage. Quinn Ewers is not like an inexperienced quarterback. It's not like he was guiding Archer there, and they still put all that on his plate. Just a super polished, super technical player that I don't know if he can play for the Jets because we think they're going to be more gap to power. We think Joel Tippmann's a humongous center. He's probably the antithesis in Jake Majors in that way. Yeah. But just as a player who I think is going to probably go in round 4 and start for like 6 or 7 years, he was the guy I kept gravitating towards.
He's one of my favorite guys in this class too. But I feel like folks are going to start accusing me of being a Longhorns guy because there's so many Texas guys that I'm like, listen, if I talk up Ja'Day Barron one more time, I think folks team. They're a really good team.
I would take the whole defensive line.
Bring him over.
Yeah, give me Alfred Collins. Yeah, give me them all.
Big Alfred Collins, right? Like again, another guy that I'm like, so Connor, you mentioned the wide receiver class, and let's talk the class as a whole as it relates to the guide. Is this as bad a class as some folks are making it out to be, as you guys have dove into the guide? Connor and then Meegs, speak on that.
No, it's not. Okay. This class has gotten a really bad rep as a whole because I think it's, number one, and I mean this in the most polite way, and obviously here we are not in this bucket, so I don't want this to come off as condescending or arrogant. 90% of media doesn't touch a prospect that's going after the 3rd round. So when they're evaluating the pool of players that are going to be drafted, say 35% of them, and a lot of them aren't stars, it gets a reputation as a bad class. But what if you told someone, I actually think this 4th round and 5th round has a lot of starters where it could feel like a normal 3rd round. And this isn't a great class because it doesn't have superstars, right? After Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter, you get a lot of like, okay, good players. Where last year it was like, who's going to get Marvin Harrison? Who's going to get Malik Neighbors? You had 6 quarterbacks going in the top 12. The class was insane. Jared Verse, nobody gave a shit about Jared Verse, and he ended up being a rock star. Like that's how good the top of that class was. So I think that's a part of the narrative that's a problem, and it's the wide receiver thing is a little bit of that because I think the day 3 wide receiver class is solid. If I find a lot of number 3s and number 4s on day 3 of a receiver class, that's good living. Like let's get players that can make a roster, that can play special teams, that can return, a lot of different things, block kicks. So that's kind of part of it. It's just that this wide receiver class, unlike the previous years, maybe doesn't have a star at the
Yeah.
top. I love Ted McMillan. I really do. If Travis Hunter played wide receiver full time, he's going to be a star. We just don't know what that's going to look like yet. I think after that, you kind of get this habit of making number twos or number threes or hoping they're going to be more. Matthew Golden is that kind of guy, right? Emeka Ibuka, I like a lot. But I think Ibuka is like the perfect high-end number two in an offense that it's kind of like when the Vikings took Jordan Addison to be Justin Jefferson's running mate. I hope a team with an alpha number one takes Emeka Ibuka. Or even a team, you look at the Commanders, like Ibuka could be fine in an offense with McLaurin. I know they traded for Debo, so that's a whole nother can of worms right now. But it's a lot of good number three wide receivers. That you look at Jalen Royals, you look at Jalen Knoll. Luther Burden's a little bit of a different bucket because we've seen him have an elite season, and then we've also seen him have a season where he didn't look like Luther Burden anymore. So that's kind of the variance in this class that's a little tough to juggle. But I look at the group from Royals to Io Manor to Kyle Williams, Torrey Horton, Elijah Badger, Andrew Armstrong. Those are guys, like, that's the number threes that I kind of want on a team, and this class is full of them.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you mentioned that. And Meegs, with you, because you've said this, and it's funny, Connor, you mentioned Jared Verse. Braden Fisk was another guy who, again, the Rams turned out to be a contributor, right? And Meegs, you talked about him 6 months before then, and you were like, listen, like, this is a guy who ends up falling that ends up producing, right? So do you agree with the notion that this class is as bad as folks are making it, or is exactly what Connor said? Like, it's because Tyler, I'm going to mention Tyler Booker because we talked about him last week. Scheme dependent. There's a lot of guys in this class that where they go, that's really going to dictate how good they are. Is that your take on it too, Meeks?
Yeah, I think Connor nailed it where like the blue chip talent in this class just isn't there. I don't think anyone feels fantastic from a consensus point to take one of these guys in the top 10, but there's just a lot of starters in this class. I mean, when you said about Emeka, like, I know Emeka can be a wide receiver too, a high end one, because for 3 years he was next to Marvin Harrison, and then for 1 year he was next to Jeremiah Smith. Like, I don't have to project that role.
Yeah.
Making wide receiver one is the projection. But I think the day 3 point's the biggest one where, like, there are just guys like who I got to watch, like Nick Nash, who was a quarterback for so many years and then led before Jeremiah Smith's playoff run, led the FBS in receiving yards, touchdowns, and catches. And he's still new to the position. He's a little like how Luke McCaffrey was last year, where like you can see the nuances isn't quite there in his game, but he's someone who's really ascended in a new position quickly. Where if he gets like his play strength up a little bit, he's gonna be a guy who can start. And he's probably not in a lot of people's top 15. And Pat Bryant's the same way. Will Shepard's the same way. Like there's just guys who are going to play in the NFL for a solid number of years that exist in this wide receiver class. I think that's why me, as just a Jets fan, I want them to take two. Whether it's taking one at 42 and then taking one in round 5, or really going for it and going like 110 and 42 or 73 and 110. You basically try to make up for the mess that was the Darius Stewart, Chad Hansen double dip, and we're trying to amend the sins of the past. But like this wide receiver class has some guys who can actually stick on NFL rosters where we don't have to look at Malachi Corley as someone who's going to take snaps.
I love that. And Connor, you when you were on with Joe, you talked about this, about the double dipping, and you said if the Jets left with Jaden Higgins and Kyle Williams, for example, right? Like that does make you look at the receiver room a little bit differently than it is right now with Alan Lazard and the collection of just another guys playing opposite him. So who do you think is the best fit opposite Garrett Wilson, just from a player standpoint, not necessarily at 7, just from a player standpoint? And then Meek, same question to you: who's Garrett's best running mate in this class that you think?
Jaden Higgins, just because the size and athletic profile, and he played inside and outside. And Garrett, I think, should actually hog the slot more, but we haven't seen enough of that. I think he should just be used exactly how CeeDee Lamb is used. But like, if you get a guy like Higgins that can be a legitimate perimeter player, but there's advantages to also playing him inside in certain looks, that's the guy that complements Garrett Wilson, because he's got jump ball ability, A+ tracking, play above the rim. When you're that big, you kind of feel like you could trust him as a blocker. Higgins would be my like A1 choice for that, because he's a pick at 42 that you could see coming to life, unless somebody values him more than that. I think he's a top 30 player in this draft. I know that's not consensus, but I would love to see Higgins, the Jets, at 42. I think that'd be a slam dunk. I'm just not convinced he necessarily makes it there.
Meegs, what about you? Who's your favorite running mate for Garrett Wilson in this class?
I mean, Jaden Higgins is a very easy, I think, answer, but to give it a little bit more variety
Yeah.
in that way. I do want to see Garrett more in the slot, but I also want to see someone like with the physicality of their game, and that's why I keep coming back to TCU's Jack Betch, where it's just
Yep.
like,
Hmm.
I know that there's an attitude to him, and where it's
Yeah.
like Garrett, as good as he is, he's more of a finesse receiver. Like he's completely elastic as he's around with the ball in his hands. He's electric in that way. But I think you want to surround him with some more, I will call it muscle, and I think that's a receiver who is going to try to basically
Yes.
run you into the ground. And
Yeah.
I find that way, and I do understand people who do like Kyle Williams for that role where it's like smaller guy but can actually play on the outside, can let
Yeah.
Garrett operate more in the slot. Where it's like if you're trying to build the old school Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, like that, all their skill sets are kind of similar, but they do a lot of things well. Receiver room, I think that's why people are going to start gravitating towards that pick.
Love it. So, Connor, before we let you wrap, because we know you have a million other podcasts to jump to this evening. First off, thank you so much for joining us. We couldn't be more grateful. And I'm super excited to see that. I love going through the guide. And I said this at the live show because I know, and I had so many people come up to me after I said it. They wait for the guide to drop so then they can tell their friends, like, hey, so I thought this. This is what I think, right?
Yeah.
My brother came up to me and he was like, oh, so you actually like he's your friend, like he pointed at you, and I said, yes, that's my friend. I know him. I wasn't lying. I was like, so when you got
MC of the event
exactly, and like you think he just plucked me off the street, but to ask you, like, to pull the curtain back a little bit, both of you guys, on just what it takes to really deliver this draft guide as the product that it is, because I don't think a lot of the folks that follow us really understand all the time and effort you guys put in it. Because I remember when you started it years ago, the team wasn't this big. The team was not this. Yeah, it was just you and Greg
and a PDF that I made.
Right.
I mean, that's like not great.
You know.
It's a great question, Dalvin, because I, in most things in life, am not overly organized. As I stare at my office, it's just a disaster. Like, all of this is good. It's the over the camera. Yeah. But when it comes to the NFL draft, it's not only an obsession, it's also a job, full-time job. You have to be mapped out to the point of where it's like over analytical. I start this process watching players in May every year. I have a spreadsheet that is just jam packed with millions and millions of words, and it's a slow burn through 11 months. But the guide, when the combine list comes out, I make our list for the guide, and I tell the guys, go claim your players because I want you to watch who you're excited to watch. Yeah. That's the point. This should be fun. And then I fill in the gaps, and we kind of have a system. Like, Meegs is a little bit, or a lot of bit like me, where he can just handle any position group and just fill voids and watch first rounders all the way to UDFAs, which is insanely helpful. And then Greg is someone that likes to watch certain players that he got to see during the year because Greg gets to a lot more college football games. Dan likes defensive line and pass rushers. We had Max just do 20 million tight ends this year like an absolute lunatic. And this was Paul's first year. So Paul felt like, I'm going to do the lesser known, lower profile players and specialists, which the Jets need. So the punters and kickers. And I'm trying to kind of give Paul a kick like, hey, you're ready for more, which is awesome that he's going to get there. So it's the one thing I have to be organized about in my life, down to a science, so that when the bell rings on April 20th or whatever it is, we have 200 reports published, filed, written up. And a huge shout out to Dan away from the scouting side for the interface that he's made that looks really good and is a really good system for the scouts to use to plug everything in, that we could see each other's work. We know where everybody stands, we know everybody's style. And it just keeps everything in sync.
That's awesome. And shout out to Paul, because Paul, Connor and I also started with the UDFAs and the low run guys. It's not for everybody. Yeah. Connor, before you go, who's the pick for the Jets at 7 a week from today? Who is it? What's your gut telling you?
I'm going to say Tyler Warren. I'm just getting a weird feel, and Meegs and I were texting about this a little earlier, that Membu just might not be there, right? Like, we need to kind of recalibrate and be like, wait a second, why is the best tackle in the draft always sitting there at 7, assuming how I feel, how a lot of people
Yep.
feel, how a lot of teams feel that Will Campbell is more of a guard, as great of a player as he is.
Yep.
So I feel like Warren is going to, one way or the other, end up on the Jets, which I think is really, really exciting and gives us a little bit more of an antsy pin needles feeling of going into day 2. Like, hey, you guys got some more work to do right now.
Yeah.
But it's going to be really interesting. Warren's going to be my final pick, though.
Love it. Meegs, I'm going to ask you again. I'm going to ask you again in the second part of this episode, but you can change your pick now. Who you got at 7? Who you dropping there?
I mean, I think for posterity's sake, I'll stick with Membu. Seeing
Yeah.
Colton Miller hold out and the Raiders don't have any interest in really talking to him, I'm like, it'd be so Jets if he went the pick before, like in the way like Steph Curry went like the pick before the Knicks.
Johnny Flynn.
Like, yeah,
that'll sit with me for the rest of all of our lives.
exactly. Where it's just like we passed on Tristan Wirfs. Membu went one. We were so close to bookend tackles, and by hell or high water, Aaron Rodgers throwing 4 touchdowns against a decrepit Dolphins team kept him from us.
And I thought we had buried Aaron Rodgers, but Meegs, you resurrected him just in time for me to bury him again on the second part of this episode. Connor, thank you so much for joining us, man. We couldn't be more grateful. Looking forward to the guide. It drops on April 20th. Did I have that right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, okay. And if it doesn't, if it's not April 20th, don't hold it against them. It'll be the day after. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Talking to you guys.
All right. Let me